Brutal combat, bone-crushing injuries, and death rates exceeding 20%. Medieval tournaments were legalized warfare where knights practiced mass killing techniques while spectators died from flying weapons and trampling horses. These weren't sporting events, they were training camps for aristocratic killers, where ransom systems bankrupted noble families and survival meant everything. Movies show tournaments as organized sporting events with clear rules and safety measures, but real medieval tournaments were essentially legalized warfare, where knights practiced mass killing techniques using full combat weapons and armor designed for battlefield effectiveness rather than sporting safety. Tournament deaths were so common that participants wrote wills before competing, and families prepared for funeral arrangements as standard procedure. Death rates in major tournaments often exceeded 20%, making tournament participation statistically more dangerous than many actual military campaigns of the period. Melee tournaments involved hundreds of armed knights fighting simultaneously in massive battlefields with no rules except survival. These events weren't individual competitions. They were mock wars where entire regions would be devastated by armed groups practicing warfare techniques on civilian populations caught in tournament areas. Ransom systems operated during tournaments where defeated knights became prisoners who had to pay substantial sums for release, often bankrupting noble families. Tournament victory meant financial gain through capturing opponents, making these events economic warfare disguised as sporting competition. Spectator deaths were regular occurrences, as tournament combat spilled into crowds, weapons flew into audiences, and horses trampled viewers. Tournament grounds became battlefields where non-participants faced mortal danger simply from proximity to the organized violence. Tournament preparation involved months of conditioning that resembled military training more than athletic preparation. Knights developed killing techniques, practiced battlefield tactics, and prepared for combat that would maim or kill opponents, rather than simply demonstrate superior skill. Training regimens included deliberate injury conditioning, where knights practiced fighting through pain, blood loss, and broken bones to prepare for tournament realities. But individual combat was nothing compared to the mass warfare that truly defined tournament culture. The most popular tournament event wasn't individual combat, it was group warfare called hastelude, where teams of knights fought pitched battles using full military equipment and tactics designed for maximum casualties among opposing forces. Team tournaments could involve 200+ knights per side fighting across several square miles of countryside for entire days. These events devastated local areas, destroyed crops, killed livestock, and terrorized civilian populations who found themselves trapped in active war zones created for noble entertainment. Communication during battle relied on horn signals and banner displays, with commanders directing tactical movements across chaotic battlefields filled with screaming horses and dying men. Capture rules in team tournaments meant that defeated knights became prisoners of war who could be held for ransom, forced into military service, or killed if they couldn't pay tribute. Team tournaments operated prisoner-of-war economies that financially ruined noble families through ransom demands. Terrain advantages were deliberately incorporated into team tournaments, with organizers choosing battlefields that included rivers, forests, towns, and fortifications that would test tactical skills while creating realistic warfare conditions. Tournament terrain became actual battlefields that left permanent damage to local landscapes. Civilian involvement was unavoidable during large team tournaments, with local populations pressed into service as infantry support, logistics providers, or involuntary participants in combat scenarios. Tournament warfare used civilians as military assets rather than protecting non-combatants from violence. Strategic planning for team tournaments involved military intelligence, supply chain management, and tactical coordination that mirrored actual war planning. Tournament teams operated as military units preparing for combat operations rather than sporting competitions. Duration of team tournaments could extend for weeks as opposing forces maneuvered across large territories, establishing camps, conducting raids, and engaging in siege warfare against fortified positions. Team tournaments became extended military campaigns rather than single-day sporting events, yet even this mass warfare paled beside the brutal reality of one-on-one combat. Individual knight combat involved weapons and techniques designed for battlefield killing rather than sporting demonstration, with participants using full military arsenal, including war hammers, battle axes, and sharpened lances intended to penetrate armor and inflict fatal wounds. Jousting wasn't the gentle sport movies portray. It involved riders charging at each other with 12-foot lances designed to punch through armor and unhorse opponents through violent impact that often resulted in crushing injuries, broken necks, or death from being trampled by warhorses. Lance construction used hardwood tips that could splinter on impact, creating wooden shrapnel that could blind participants or penetrate armor gaps. Tournament lances were weapons designed to inflict maximum damage rather than safely determine winners through point-scoring systems. Horse collision during jousting created devastating crashes where 1,500-pound warhorses collided at high speed, often killing both mounts and riders through crushing impact or trampling. Tournament horses were trained for battlefield combat rather than sporting safety. Armor failure was common during tournament combat, with protective equipment designed for battlefield conditions failing under tournament stress. Broken armor left participants vulnerable to follow-up attacks that could prove fatal when opponents pressed their advantages. Weapon variety in tournaments included military arsenal of maces, warhammers, battle axes, and specialized armor-piercing weapons designed to defeat contemporary protection systems. Tournament combat tested battlefield weapons against battlefield armor in real combat conditions. Combat duration in individual matches could extend for hours as armored opponents battered each other with weapons until one was killed, seriously wounded, or physically exhausted beyond ability to continue fighting. Tournament endurance meant surviving prolonged attempted murder. Exhaustion became as deadly as weapons, with knights collapsing from heatstroke inside metal armor that became furnaces during extended summer tournament combat. The deadly spectacles came with a price that would bankrupt noble families and destroy entire bloodlines. Tournament economics operated through complex systems of wagering, ransom, equipment seizure, and financial ruin that made these events as much about wealth transfer as combat demonstration, destroying noble families through gambling and defeat costs. Betting on tournament outcomes involved enormous sums that could bankrupt noble households, with entire estates wagered on combat results. Tournament gambling created financial warfare where military defeat meant economic destruction for losing participants and their families. Equipment costs for tournament participation required investments equivalent to modern luxury cars, with full armor, weapons, warhorses, and support staff, creating expense barriers that excluded all but wealthiest nobles from participation. Tournament costs bankrupted families seeking social advancement through combat success. Prize money for tournament victories came primarily from defeated opponents' ransom payments, equipment seizure, and betting winnings rather than organized purses. Tournament economics rewarded violence and financial ruin inflicted on opponents rather than sporting achievement. Debt collection after tournaments often required legal action, with defeated knights facing imprisonment or forced military service to repay gambling losses and equipment costs. Sponsorship systems involved noble patrons financing tournament participants in exchange for shares of ransom profits and betting winnings. Tournament financing operated like investment schemes where patrons sought returns through successful violence rather than sporting entertainment. Insurance systems developed around tournament participation, with financial agreements designed to protect families from economic ruin caused by death, disability, or defeat of participating knights. Tournament insurance recognized that these events created financial catastrophe rather than sporting competition. Economic impact of major tournaments devastated local economies through resource consumption, infrastructure damage, and diversion of agricultural labor to tournament support services. Tournament economics extracted wealth from local populations while providing entertainment for aristocratic participants. But the true purpose of these deadly spectacles reveals something far more sinister about medieval society. The social and political functions of tournaments revealed their true purpose as training systems for aristocratic warfare and methods of social control that reinforced class hierarchy through spectacular demonstrations of noble violence capability. Political alliances were formed and dissolved through tournament participation, with combat outcomes influencing diplomatic relationships, marriage negotiations, and military cooperation agreements between noble families. Tournament results carried political consequences that affected regional power structures. Military recruitment occurred through tournament observation, with successful participants gaining positions in noble military organizations and unsuccessful ones losing social standing. Tournament performance determined military careers and social advancement opportunities within aristocratic society. Training effectiveness of tournaments provided realistic combat experience that prepared participants for actual warfare through practice with authentic weapons, armor, and tactics. Tournament combat developed killing skills rather than sporting abilities. Psychological conditioning through tournament participation created knights comfortable with inflicting death, preparing aristocratic warriors for the emotional demands of battlefield killing and conquest. Social mobility through tournament success allowed some knights to advance beyond their birth circumstances, but failure often meant social destruction, financial ruin, and loss of noble status. Tournament participation was high-stakes gambling with social position as currency. International relations were affected by tournament outcomes, with victories and defeats influencing diplomatic negotiations, trade agreements, and military alliances between kingdoms. Tournament combat carried diplomatic weight that extended far beyond sporting competition. Cultural transmission through tournament participation taught younger nobles about violence, hierarchy, and power relationships within aristocratic society. Tournament observation educated noble children about their expected roles as warrior elites prepared to kill and die for social position. Medieval tournaments weren't sporting competitions, they were training programs for aristocratic warfare that used legalized killing as preparation for actual military service. Every aspect of tournament culture was designed to develop efficient killers rather than skilled athletes. Your modern sporting events, with their emphasis on safety, rules, and athletic achievement, would seem impossibly tame to medieval knights who understood that tournament participation meant preparing for and engaging in lethal combat, designed to test killing ability rather than sporting skill. Medieval tournaments weren't sporting competitions, they were training programs for aristocratic warfare, using legalized killing as preparation for military service. Death rates exceeded many battles while tournament culture developed efficient killers rather than skilled athletes. Modern sporting safety would seem impossibly tame to tournament participants.